Planning and Recreation Resources Chief Planner. My program area oversees the trails coordination work that Jennifer does. I'm also sitting in for Kelly McClary, our division director, who was unable to join us today. I'd also like to acknowledge that we do have a number of folks from our DCR director's office, including our deputy directors, Frank Stovall and Andrew Smith, as well as our DCR director, Matt Wells. Frank, I saw in your note that Matt is here. Matt, would you like to say a few words to get us started this morning?
Sure. Yeah, just a couple of words. I appreciate the opportunity and appreciate everyone joining for the meeting. It's good to be with you all virtually. This has been a busy few weeks for DCR, and in particular, a few months for DCR, and in particular for trails. On our end, we have been planning and working through how we are going to deploy the significant levels of funding that DCR got in the budget, about $100 million, $110 million across the biennium for maintenance and capital, which is great and very welcome. On the trails side specifically, we completed the Dahlgren Railroad Heritage Trail feasibility study that I think we're going to hear about a little bit more today. And managed to turn that around on a pretty tight timeline. So I want to go ahead and thank staff for all their efforts on that. I had an opportunity to visit the future site of the Foster Falls Inn as a part of our park managers meeting along New River Trail. So that's going to be, I think, really exciting when it opens in the spring. And if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I hope you will once we get it open, because I think it'll be a real nice addition to that trail, and will really I think open it up to an entire new audience. And then just this Monday, I had the opportunity to break ground on a new trail center for Highbridge Trail State Park. So that'll be a combination trail center, visitor center. It's a $2 million project that we hope to open by next fall. And again, I think once that's open, that'll take an already very popular rail trail park and open it up to an even broader group of folks. So lots going on. Excited to hear from the speakers we did. I also want to note we had an opportunity to sit down with some of the folks from VDOT to begin the discussion about how we can work with them for the new Trails office. So look forward to hearing from them about how they're moving forward on that, and appreciate the time and everyone's participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Director. In terms of today, again, I'm seeing a lot more people come on board. If you could please make sure you mute your mics as well as your phones as you come on, that would be greatly appreciated. Jennifer, myself, and Mary Bishop from our PCMO office will also be monitoring the chat box. If you do have questions throughout today's meeting, we'd appreciate you putting them in there, and we will address them as soon as we're able or as part of the chat box. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the meeting to Jennifer.
Thank you, Samantha. And welcome everyone to the meeting. Mary Bishop, I just want to double check with you. We are recording, and that is working?
Yes.
Thank you. So the STAC was formed to help DCR develop and implement a statewide system of attractive, sustainable, connected, and enduring trails. And that is why we are meeting today. And for our agenda, we have some really exciting topics to go over today. We have Angel Deem from the VDOT to talk with us about the State Trails Office. Emily Stock with DRPT is going to talk with us about the state rail plan. I'm going to share some information on the Dahlgren Trail feasibility study. Reed Perry is going to talk with us about the proposed Chesapeake National Recreation Area. Nick Donahue is going to share with us some information to help us understand the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And then we have Wayne Clark to talk about the Cisco presence in Raleigh Triangle and the economic impact there. Andy Clark's going to share some information on alternatives to bollards for us to consider. And then Kat Anthony will provide an update on the Virginia Trails Alliance. And then we'll provide some DCR updates, talk a little bit about upcoming conferences and workshops and some next steps. So Angel, I'd like to turn it over to you at this time. Are you there? And do you want to test your mic?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you. And just tell me next when you want me to go to the next slide.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you everyone, and I'm joining you today from beautiful Virginia Beach. We're at the Governor's Transportation Conference. So apologies if there's any jet noise as I'm speaking. I'm really hoping they don't fly over while I'm talking. I have to my right my colleague, Russ Dudley, who is the director of our local assistance division. So if you'll just jump in to the next slide, I'll share some remarks. Okay, so VDOT is really excited to embark on this journey with the State Trails Office. As I'm sure everyone on this meeting knows, there was some significant general fund dollars provided through the state budget just this past June to help us stand up the Trails Office, the purposes of which is to plan and develop and construct multi-use trails throughout the Commonwealth. So specifically, the budget charges our Commonwealth Transportation Board to prioritize funds for new trails, projects that improve connectivity on existing networks, and then, of course, keeping an eye towards geographic diversity when using those funds. It also directed the establishment of the...
Yeah, I'm just like using the hotspot on my phone.
Sorry, is there some feedback? There's a jet.
I think that's been corrected.
Okay. I'm going to pause just a second while the jet flies over. Okay, so the State Trails Office that we're just starting to launch into is going to develop a state trails plan in collaboration with all of you, and I'm sure other stakeholders. And we'll also work with DCR and others to stand up a state trails information clearinghouse. All of this was sort of detailed in a report provided to our board in January of 2022. That was really sort of the background for this initiative. So we are specifically charged with coordinating with you all, with STAC as well as DCR, but certainly not to the exclusion of other interested parties. So next slide. So the funding, already getting lots of questions about the funds, and so we provided this table to our board and others to just lay out what we're looking at today. So in 2021, there were $10 million set aside from general fund money for investment in trails. That those funds have not been allocated. And then, of course, the recent action that I already mentioned in June of 22 adds another $79 million to that from general fund dollars. In addition, the budget language directs us for the FY 23 and 24 funding cycle to set aside $14 million, $7 each year, from the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is a federal program that Russ's team oversees. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So for a grand total of $103 million at this time. Right, next slide. So again, following the direction provided by the legislature and with that report in mind, we're moving forward with standing up the Trails Office. It will be a matrix organization within VDOT, and all that means is that we're using everyone's talent. So the local assistance division that Russ leads, they are expert at working with localities and others and accessing various revenue streams and executing agreements for those and monitoring them. So we'll be using staffing from that office as well as, of course, from our planning office. And VDOT's planning office will be the lead through the front for the State Trails office. And then per the budget, again, 800,000 is to be set aside and used for initial funding of positions, as well as for us to onboard consultants to help us with the analysis that will be necessary to inform that State Trails plan and to pull all those pieces together for the information data clearinghouse. We'll also leverage those resources to help us do some robust outreach as we move along. All right, next slide. So what we're calling high priority trails, so these were articulated by the General Assembly members. However, to be clear, there weren't specific budget amounts prescribed to each trail. Instead, what you see here is what we were provided. So certainly that is the intent that these 5 would get priority consideration as the Trails office moves forward. But there is some flexibility retained, and I'll speak of that in just a moment, what we're doing to address looking at these 5 trails alongside putting together a trails plan, which will of course allow us to look at other opportunities in the future. Next slide. So I was asked to speak about the status of that funding that we just reviewed. So the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program, or we refer to it as TAP, again, $14 million to be set aside for qualifying trails. So those are those regional trails or connections between existing regional trails. So as that budget direction was coming out, we had just completed the FY23-24 TAP selections. So we went back and looked at that and found that just shy of 12 million in projects were funded through TAP that qualify for this, State Trails program, or regional trails, if you will. So what we're doing right now is we're evaluating applications that we received that did not receive funding to see which ones might also qualify so that we can fulfill that commitment up to 14 million. So an additional 2.2 million there. And then our finance folks are in the midst of programming that $800,000 for the initial staffing cost, along with identifying resources that we have readily available to help us along these endeavors. So we want to utilize existing contracts that we have so as to save procurement time. So we're in the process of doing that right now. And then just very recently at their September meeting, the CTB authorized $5 million of the general fund monies to support those 5 priority trails. And so specifically what that means is they authorize up to $1 million for each trail to give VDOT the opportunity to sort of get our arms around the status of each, where they're at from a project development perspective, because we know that each are at very different places, to determine what right-of-way negotiations and construction planning will be necessary, and obviously to nail down the cost for each. So, but prior to expending any additional funds, just like any of our other transportation projects and programs, we will need to come to the Commonwealth Transportation Board again and seek their approval to authorize additional funds to support those 5 trails. All right, next slide. Okay, so next steps. We are in the midst of doing that initial evaluation. We've just gotten started. We've given ourselves kind of a tentative time frame of middle to end of November to have at least preliminary information pulled together. So our district planning staff are working with folks that have direct knowledge about these 5 trails. So we're doing that work, and then intend to report back to the CTB on that evaluation. We intend to give them an update in December. Not sure that we'll have all of the information pulled together by then, but we certainly intend to keep them engaged into where we're headed with those 5. We're also seeking to fill positions. So we were given 3 positions to support the Trails office. So we are in that HR process of creating new position descriptions. But as I shared with our colleagues at DCR, we're not going to have that delay our moving forward. We're using folks in that existing planning group and local assistance group to get going on this while we identify new staff. And then, of course, beginning outreach and coordination, some of which we're doing today. And then, once we have resources in place, we'll begin in earnest that development of the state trails plan and the information clearinghouse. So we have a lot on the plate to execute, but we're up for the challenge, and we know that we have lots of partners such as you all that can help us succeed. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions. I hope I didn't run over too much.
So we did have a few questions come in over in the chat box. Jennifer, you want to take those now, or do we want to wait till a more specific time? You're on mute.
We have about 3 minutes for questions if somebody has a quick question.
Okay, so the first question in the chat box is from Jimmy. Is why is the State Trails Office under VDOT instead of DCR?
That was a decision of the legislature, I think is the best way for me to answer that.
The next question we have, if multi-use trails is the focus, does this mean that recreational trails that are natural surface won't get attention and opportunities for funding from this new office?
Sure. And I would say, we don't want to answer that definitively at this time. I mean, that's certainly a good question. Prioritization will be an important part of the work that the Trails Office does and how we identify opportunities in that plan. So I think through establishing those criteria, again, taking that direction that we received from the General Assembly, and with that report in the backdrop, I think we can look at, what's the disposition of, trails that can serve a transportation component, but that also are recreational or exclusively recreational. I think that'll just sort itself out as we identify, what those criteria are and what the prioritization process might look like that will inform that.
Thank you very much, Angel.
I think we
I appreciate it.
We need to move on, Jennifer, is that?
I think so, and I think we should move on. But okay. We can please enter your questions in the chat.
Questions in here that we may be able to get to later on in the presentation or at when we have some more discussion time.
So, and also with this presentation, because we are on a tight schedule, if you guys will enter your questions in the chat, and then we will try to get you answers after the meeting. I'd like to welcome Emily Stock. She's the Chief of Rail Transportation with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Emily, you want to test your mic?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Just tell me next.
Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Emily Stock here, and I am also calling in from the Governor's Transportation Conference. Unlike Angel, though, I am sitting in a bus in the conference venue in the convention center. There's a model of an HRT bus here, so it's pretty exciting to be at the conference sitting in a bus talking to you all. And our rail planning analyst Katie Miller is with me in the bus, and hopefully this will shield us from any jet noise, but we're in the same location. Thanks for having me today. I talked to this group last year when we were starting out with the statewide rail plan, and we have a draft out right now that I'll tell you a little bit about, but I'll just dive right into the rail plan policy framework. We have a policy section in the rail plan this round. We do this rail plan every 4 years for the Federal Railroad Administration to get funding from the Federal Railroad Administration and set out our vision and projects for the next 6 years and also for the future, for the long-term future. And our rail plan policy framework for trails related to railroads is really simple: to prioritize the preservation of rail right-of-way. Yes, next slide. Thank you. Prioritize the preservation of rail right-of-way for rail and transportation use while facilitating proposals for co-located recreational uses as appropriate. So our mission at DRPT is to it's really in simple terms to get the most out of the rail infrastructure, at least for the rail team and that exists. And so part of that is preserving rail right of way. And if there is no longer freight business or passenger rail business on a rail right of way, and there are opportunities to keep it in transportation use through rails to trails situation, we certainly want to be facilitators there and support that. So we do that by coordinating with railroads as outlined in HB 2088, and that really set DRPT up to work with DCR and other agencies to be a coordinator with the railroads themselves through this process, especially in cases where trails cross railroad lines or railroad right of way. And so, as I mentioned, I'm here with Katie Miller. She is our new DRPT rail planning contact for HB 2088 issues. And one thing that is new to us with DRPT is the founding of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, VPRA. VPRA was spun off from DRPT in order to advance the projects related to transforming rail in Virginia, which is an initiative to increase passenger rail capacity around the state, but most of the active projects that they're working on are between Richmond and DC right now, and also around the New River Valley to extend passenger rail service down there. And so they're actually managing construction projects and some planning projects related to passenger rail and separating passenger rail from freight rail in some locations. So DRPT is working with VPRA to fine-tune a process for coordination with VPRA as a landowner based on agreements with railroads for various quarter segments. So this is still a work in progress, but VPRA has taken ownership of railroads in different parts of the state. And next slide will show where those are generally in yellow, the right-of-way acquisition. So you'll see between Richmond and Washington and what's known as the S line, from the North Carolina line up to Petersburg, and some sections on the east-west corridor that from Doswell over to Clifton Forge, and then a little section down in the New River Valley. So VPRA owns some of the right-of-way in these areas, but has very strict agreements with the railroad operators about the uses. And so what we're doing right now is we're working with the legal team over at VPRA to put together more of an info map to go along with the map that you see in front of you, that shows what VPRA's contracts with railroads say about each one of those segments. So I'd like to be able to communicate that to you guys when we have it ready, because it'll help with our communication with railroads, because sometimes the communication is going to be with VPRA first rather than the railroads themselves in corridors that they own. So next slide. So the statewide rail plan has been out for about a month. Our 30-day public review period is closing on the 27th. That's today. But if you have comments, please just keep them coming. The rail plan, the draft rail plan, is available at drpt.virginia.gov, and it is a true draft. So we are going to be making some changes between this draft version and the next version, which we hope will come out in December or January, and just a little bit of information about projects that we're aware of and coordinating on. The Long Bridge pedestrian and bike bridge project across the Potomac River recently got a $20 million RAISE grant, so that's very exciting. Rails with Trails development. The Eastern Shore Rail to Trail project is advancing. That's, of course, a former Eastern Shore Railroad line that we're very happy is staying in transportation use. That's really a great case study, I think, for how DRPT works with railroads to coordinate to see if there's any chance for the rail line to stay in rail use for freight, and if it can't, if there is not a good business case for that, to keep it in transportation use through a trail project. And of course, there is a new project on the horizon. There was a 30% design grant awarded for the Southeast Rail Corridor S line between Petersburg and the North Carolina line with VPRA and NCDOT. And so that's a project that went through NEPA quite a few years ago, and there was a Greenway study associated with that. And so I've made sure that the folks who are working on this project are still aware of that Greenway study, and so as that advances, I'm sure there'll be more coordination on the design.
Thank you, Emily. And as I said, if you have questions for Emily, please put them in the chat, and I will email those to her for a response after the meeting today. I'm going to switch over now to the Dogwood Railroad Heritage Trail feasibility study. Just give you a little basic background on that project. This is a map of the trail. As you can see in black, those are the trailheads, the main parking area at Bloomsbury Road, and then there's several other smaller trailheads along the route. There's a little portion in red on this map that connects the trail to Route 301. That part is not owned by one single owner that owns the rest of the trail. And so our study actually focused on that entire 16.7 mile corridor because we think that connection to 301 is important. The General Assembly passed House Bill 30, which directed Virginia Department of Conservation to review the properties of the Dahlgren Trail and make recommendations on the trail's suitability as a recreational area for incorporation into Caledon State Park. Currently, this trail is privately owned. A permit is required to use the trail, but it's used by hikers, mountain bikers, bird watchers, and then also campers and equestrians for special events. There's been like a 2-decade effort to place the trail in public ownership. For the study, we weren't required to by the General Assembly, but we did do some public outreach. We did a number of stakeholder phone interviews, email interviews. We had a listening session where the two sides basically of the trail, of the decision about whether it becomes part of Caledon State Park, got a chance to present. And we did send letters out to all adjacent landowners for their feedback. And we did have a constrained amount of time for the study, so we used studies that had already been done primarily for the needs assessment. And there's been a regional greenway feasibility study, King George County's comprehensive plan, and their trailway feasibility study, and Virginia Outdoors Demand Survey, and then also the Rappahannock Health District had a community health improvement plan that we used. In terms of market, we used Esri Products for like a very quick market study. They have a drive time analysis where you can overlay population to see how many people are within, say, a 2-hour drive, and actually because of this location not too far from Metro DC area, there's like 8.6 million people within a 2 hours drive. We also did used community analyst software through Esri to sort of look at the market potential. And so for instance, that block there that's in dark red, which is the block that includes Caledon State Park, they have information on the market potential there, broken down by mountain bikes, bicycling, hiking, horseback riding, jogging, bird watching. And we weren't actually asked to look at it for the study, but walking for exercise was actually the most potential use for that corridor. In terms of a conclusion, we didn't feel we had enough information to say whether or not the project was feasible. And so in the report, we identified some additional things that we felt needed to be resolved before we could determine the feasibility, which was, some additional property, obviously, for trailheads and site distance when you're crossing the roadways. And there are some realignments that are in progress that have not been completed. And also there's, some unsafe conditions that need to be mitigated. And so it's still a work in progress, and we are awaiting further direction from the General Assembly to determine whether or not there's more work for DCR with that project. So now I'd like to introduce Reed Perry with the Chesapeake Conservancy to talk with us about the Chesapeake National Recreation Area. Reed, are you available? And is your mic working?
Hey, I'm here.
Great. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much. As introduced, my name is Reed Perry. I'm the Manager of External Affairs for Chesapeake Conservancy, which is a Chesapeake Bay watershed-wide conservation nonprofit. We work on conservation from a number of different angles, helping with actual land conservation projects for new parks, wildlife refuges, access to the bay. We do some restoration work in Pennsylvania in the Susquehanna River Basin, and we do a great deal of geospatial mapping and analysis for a variety of different partners, federal partners, state partners, nonprofits, et cetera. But from the very beginning of our organization's history, we have been really focused on increasing public access to the Bay and celebrating the Bay's significance as a national treasure and connecting people to really the diversity of resources, the recreational opportunities that we have here. So we've been kind of working on an idea for a national park from our organization's history, but this is an idea that's been around for a long time, and it's finally coming to fruition. So just want to take a few minutes to walk you through what this proposal is, but I wanted to start out with a quick video. So I think that's on the next slide. And I'm not sure if you're able to hit play there. I'm not sure we have volume. Okay, well, I think maybe we'll skip the video just concerning time. Sorry about that, folks. But I'll tell you what, I do have a link to our website at the end of the slideshow, so you can take a look there. What I wanted to start with is that the Bay is a national treasure. It's significant from a number of different aspects, historically, culturally, ecologically. Of course, outdoor recreation, as you know, is a big economic driver in our region, not only from a trails perspective, but recreation on the Bay, along the Bay at our parks. There's also the heritage and ecotourism opportunities, which are economic drivers as well. And so, for this reason, for all these reasons, the Bay is a national treasure. And from the start of the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort, there was also this parallel initiative to establish a national park unit for the Bay. And that kind of kicked off more than 30 years ago. And it kicked off an evolutionary process to bring the National Park Service into the Chesapeake Bay as a formal partner. Congress established the Chesapeake Bay Gateways and Water Trails program, which is a federal program that provides grants, financial and technical assistance to sites and places throughout the Bay for educational programming, for public access, for recreation, etc. We also had the establishment of the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail, another way to kind of connect our landscape together and have National Park Service support for interpretation, particularly when it comes to Indigenous culture and history in the Chesapeake Bay. And both of these have been really beneficial to our region. And, the National Park Service has been a great partner, but these are not units of the National Park System. And so we're really limited in terms of the amount of resources and involvement that we're able to leverage. And it's important to note that a lot of landscapes around the country have units. And I'll give you an example. San Francisco's Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which ties together a number of different sites and places throughout that region. It's an official unit of the National Park System. It brings together also local parks and state parks. There's Boston Harbor Islands National Recreation Area in Massachusetts. So there are already examples across the country of this vision. And so that brings me to the next slide. What is this all about? First and foremost, this is about getting that, actually the slide before, sorry. Yeah, so this is about establishing a national park unit dedicated to the Chesapeake Bay. The second point, once we establish this and get this designation, it's going to allow us to increase the number of parks and places that the public can access the Bay. It's also an opportunity to enhance existing parks and sites around the Bay. And primarily how this is going to happen is through cooperative management agreements. So when legislation is introduced and passed by Congress, there will be a provision allowing this authority. So the National Park Service can enter into cooperative agreements with, say, state parks in Maryland and Virginia, other partners, and provide financial resources, other resources to really help lift up those parks, enhance their connections to the Bay, enhance interpretation about the Chesapeake Bay, and create a very coordinated visitor experience. What I would think is a national park worthy visitor experience. The next key aspect is we want to celebrate everything that makes the Chesapeake Bay special. Its natural significance, historic and cultural significance, and of course, celebrate outdoor recreation. Why are we doing this? What's the point of all this? Well, by connecting people to these different stories, by getting people out and experiencing the Chesapeake Bay, we can inspire people to join the movement to become conservation stewards. It's really true that if you can't access the Bay, if you've never been out of the Bay, then you're probably not going to care much about the Bay's health, and so it's really important that we make sure everyone has a chance to experience this wonderful resource that we have and that so defines us. Next slide. So I'll just mention briefly, who is behind this. So for the past few years, we've been building a coalition of supporters, which includes really a huge and diverse group of individuals representing nonprofits, representing folks in the aquaculture and watermen, folks in the heritage and tourism industries, folks in the recreation industry. So, a really big and diverse coalition, but everyone is united in this effort and the idea for a Chesapeake National Recreation Area. And, at the end of my presentation here, I'll share a link to our website. But if you would be interested in joining our coalition, it's totally open. We'd love to have your support, and I can provide my email address as well, so that you can jump in and help us. Next slide, please. So I'll just tell you very quickly, what's the status of this? So we've been working on this idea for, as I said, a number of years. Senator Van Hollen and Congressman John Sarbanes from Maryland have put together a formal working group on Capitol Hill. That includes a number of congressional offices, including the Virginia Senate and congressional offices. It includes a number of key stakeholders, including recreation, but also folks from kind of the waterman sector, and some other key stakeholders. That group has been working to pull together a draft bill. So that's a bill plus a map where the National Recreation Area would take place initially. We expect that draft bill to be released as soon as November next month, and it's taken a long time to get to this point. But I want to really highlight the importance of the draft bill. This is an unusual step. It's very typical that for Congress or even state legislatures, they don't just introduce a draft. They introduce the actual bill, and then it goes through a hearing, and there's an opportunity for folks to weigh in. But the bill has already been introduced. Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Sarbanes and their congressional partners are taking a very intentional step by releasing a draft, so that even before this is introduced in Congress, the public has a chance to read the bill, look at the map, and get a sense for what is actually being proposed, and then provide comment. So the way that this is going to work is that the draft bill will be released. There will be, press releases. We'll have some sort of event, and then there will be a period of public comment and an online forum, sort of similar to how you would comment on, a federal rule through the regulatory comment website, where anyone can provide their comment. And this is a really important opportunity for folks to say, hey, there's this great site that I don't see on the map, and we would love for this to be part of the Chesapeake National Recreation Area. Or, gee, it would be great if the bill included this provision to better support trails or recreation in this way. And so I'd really encourage you all to keep your eyes peeled for that opportunity, and I'll of course follow up and flag it for this group so that you all have a chance to comment. And then, following that comment period, the senators and congressmen will incorporate those comments into the draft and revise it, and then the bill will be introduced in Congress in the next session. So that's where we are. That's where we're headed. It's a really exciting moment. And next slide. So that's really the long and short of this proposal. This is an idea that's been around for a long time. I did want to say, why does this matter for you? This group is focused on trails and access. The National Recreation Area is all about that. Our missions are totally aligned. This is an opportunity to celebrate outdoor recreation, to help people access outdoor recreation opportunities, and to connect important places and sites throughout the Bay region. I also think it's a really ideal opportunity to incorporate trails that can connect people to these sites that will be included in the recreation area. And I'll give you one example. This is not going to be on the map, but I do think kind of long term it could be an opportunity, which is Cape Charles, for instance, on the Eastern Shore. We have the Eastern Shore Rail to Trail that's being developed. Cape Charles has a lot of historic and significance and recreation opportunities. So, that's just one example of one potential site that could be included through a rail connection, through a trail connection. So that's all I have to share today. And as I said, here's our website, and I'll be happy to follow up with this group once that draft bill is released.
Hey, Jennifer, you're on mute.
Thank you. If you will put a link to the video in the chat bar, that's a beautiful video. So you guys should all take advantage of that and take a look at that if you have the opportunity. We're going to run on to the next presentation because we are a little behind. Understanding the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Nick, are you on the line?
I am. Can you see me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm here. And yes, so I'm happy to go whenever you want. And I don't actually have a presentation. I was just going to talk there kind of through things. So Jennifer, thanks for the opportunity to be with you this morning. My name is Nick Donahue. For those of you who don't know me, I previously served as Deputy Secretary of Transportation and am now a consultant. But Jennifer asked me to come and talk with this group about kind of just the Commonwealth Transportation Board, opportunities there as it relates to kind of multi-use trails. And I just have to say, this is from my perspective, and I've dealt with the CTB and Virginia transportation policy for about 12 years working in the governor's office. This is probably one of the most exciting times when it comes to kind of multi-use trails and trail funding at the state level. There's $103 million that's included in between the two adopted state budgets for regional multi-use trails. This is a really historic and kind of unprecedented level of funding. And I think it's important to talk about, like, how did we get here? And why is there now, after so many years, like this kind of like level of funding for trails? What does that mean going forward for the future? And like, what are opportunities for this group and others who are like focused on trails to try and see sustained and continued funding levels kind of moving forward into the future? And so as I kind of see it, where things snowballed in the existing kind of funding levels is back in 2021, there was a much smaller general fund surplus than we ultimately had in the last session. And when we were in the Northam administration, we had a little bit of money that was going to transportation from that general fund surplus. And we decided that, you know, the pandemic had really demonstrated the importance of trails, and we put $10 million in the budget. And if I'm being very honest with you guys, we were nervous about whether that money was going to make it through the General Assembly session or whether the legislature was going to kind of cut it and redirect those funds to other purposes and other uses. And to our utter delight and shock, the General Assembly actually increased the amount of funding that they were providing for trails in there. And not only that, they then directed the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, which I led at the time, to conduct kind of a assessment of trails and report back to the General Assembly over, you know, the year of 2021. That work was done by Cambridge Systematics, supported by a number of folks, including DCR, Jennifer, and others with DCR participated in the work groups for that effort. And the report recommended to the General Assembly that they do essentially three things. The first was establish a statewide trails office. The second was develop a, you know, wholesome and fulsome statewide trails plan. And the final and, you know, probably most important recommendation was create some sort of sustainable and ongoing funding for trails in the Commonwealth. Because while there's dedicated funding for transit and there's dedicated funding for rail and there's dedicated funding for like road maintenance, there's actually no like bucket of money that's kind of just for like, you know, larger regional multi-use trails. Like you can compete in, you know, the Smart Scale program, which is kind of the big program to fund projects in Virginia. You can compete in transportation alternatives, but there wasn't a program kind of focused on trails. And that report recommended the Assembly should actually look at changing that and creating a dedicated funding source. And I personally would like to think that that then resulted in the language that was in this year's Appropriations Act. And again, just to walk back through that, there's $89 million in general funds for regional multi-use trails. And in addition to that, and the second part to me is, while it's less money, is actually as important, the Assembly directed the Commonwealth Transportation Board to set aside $7 million in the first year and the second year, so $14 million from the increased federal funds for the Transportation Alternatives Program for regional trails. And I think that really kind of creates an opportunity there for an ongoing funding source, potentially for trails moving forward, where at least every 2 years there can be some amount of money that's available for on a competitive basis for trails. And so if I were sitting in your shoes, like what are some of the most important things to kind of work with the Commonwealth Transportation Board and to try and ensure continued funding levels for trails in the future? I think number one is the statewide trails plan. Engage with the state trails office there and make sure that that plan comes out with good information and implementable and actionable projects to move forward. That is the plan that the Assembly is going to be looking at in the future to kind of determine, from my perspective, what level of funding they want to provide for trails. I think the second thing is you've got to work with the Commonwealth Transportation Board and talk with them and engage the members there about how are they planning to spend this $103 million that's in the budget. And so who is the CTB? What is the CTB? How do you engage with it? The CTB is a 14-member board that's appointed by the governor with staggered terms. So like the current CTB is a mix of people that were appointed by some actually Governor McAuliffe, some by Governor Northam, some by Governor Youngkin there. And they are the board that votes on allocating all state and state-controlled federal transportation dollars in Virginia. And so we always like to think of this VDOT as kind of like the entity that controls all the money. VDOT plays a huge role in delivering projects, developing projects, and providing advice to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. But ultimately, those 14 individuals are the ones who determine whether or not a project actually gets funded. And on the trail side and like bike ped projects, because the transportation alternatives funds are directly controlled by the board members where they individually select projects in their districts, the board has historically played a much larger role in those types of projects moving forward. And so the board, as I said, is 14 members. 9 are district-based members. And so there's Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads. It's basically the 1932 congressional districts with Northern Virginia added there. And each of those members represent that geographic area. And so if you live in a part of the state there, you need to be talking to that member, because that member, when they engage VDOT, their voice is going to carry a lot of weight when they talk about their priorities or the things they want to see or the process that they want to see for the allocation of those dollars. And then there's 5 at-large members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. It's a mix of urban and rural, and those folks are supposed to take kind of a statewide basis as they look at things. So you should always engage the at-large members in addition to your district members there as you talk about your priorities. To date, I've seen nothing in public or heard much private discussion about what the state's plan is for the use of those funds. Some of you may know the Senate did send a letter, to the administration outlining some trails that they would like to see that $89 million in general funds go to. But ultimately, again, it's going to be back to this board and to like where do they allocate these funds. There is language in the budget directing them to give priority to new regional multi-use trails, kind of missing link connections in the existing regional trail network, and then also to ensure geographic diversity in the allocation of those funds. The $14 million from transportation alternatives is going to be slightly different in that there's also federal laws that govern how those dollars are allocated. And so for that $14 million, the board has to conduct a competitive process where they solicit funds or applications, from folks throughout the Commonwealth for the award of that. What I don't know is whether or not the CTB is going to impose any sort of selection criteria or rating criteria on top of kind of just this competitive grant program requirement in the federal law. 'Cause that's all the federal law says. It just says you have to ask people whether or not they have projects they want, and you have to evaluate them on a competitive basis. And so it really leaves that full discretion, again, with the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So what would be the best possible outcome, again, if I were sitting in your shoes for these funds? One, it's that you get a statewide rail plan that shows trails all throughout the state and shows people both in urban, rural, and suburban areas how the trails can benefit their communities. Secondly, It's that you have people asking for funds in excess of this $3 million that is available. So demonstrating that there is a significant need for trail funding out there to kind of show the General Assembly as well as the Transportation Board that this is something that's really important to a lot of the communities and constituents across the Commonwealth. And then the hope from that point is, if that can be demonstrated both in the plan and then in the request for funding, is that at a minimum, this $14 million continues in the budget each biennium, so that there's this kind of dedicated funding source. And then ideally, when legislators see that projects in their district might not be able to get funded because of the lower funding levels, that they take steps to kind of augment it on an ongoing basis, as they did in the current budget that is there today. I'll see in the chat, someone's asked, like, who are these board members? I'll put some of that stuff in the chat there that you can see it. But Jennifer, that's kind of the key things I wanted to relay. And I did want to leave a little bit of time for like any questions that folks may have, if there's like things that people were hoping I would have covered that I didn't.
Thank you. And we have 3 minutes if somebody has a question for Nick. Samantha, do you see any questions in the chat bar? And you're muted if you're talking. Okay.
Hey, this is Brantley with Virginia Bicycling Federation. Thanks, Nick. There's a comment about how influential and supportive of trails you've been in your career, and I just wanted to echo that. And also, you mentioned, or can you give a very brief overview of how exactly the CTB approves funding? Because I know that they're responsible for the TAP funding, but there are other things too. Give us a little insight on that.
Yeah, so traditionally in this trail, the $89 million potentially could fall outside of this process. I need to like caveat that. But traditionally, for the allocation of funds, there are existing programs, either that are established in statute and have statutory requirements, or at a bare minimum have board policy requirements that outline how projects will be considered and then how to allocate those funds. And so for Smart Scale and for Transportation Alternatives, or TAP, board policy and statute requires them to solicit applications, to evaluate them, and then to make their kind of selections in public. Other programs like the State of Good Repair program require that VDOT do a lot of analysis, publish that analysis, and then recommend projects to the board. And again, that's really about like replacing bridges and reconstructing pavement. And so what I don't know, Brantley, is like, what process, which of those two angles is the board more likely to follow for this trails funding? And so they could, you know, decide to kind of do a whole TAP construct for all $103 million, where they open up to everyone, they ask for applications, they evaluate them, and then there's a discussion at the board level where they vote on the projects that they want to fund. Or, you know, because there's no requirement other than what they have to consider about the process through which they consider projects, they could do something more akin to State of Good Repair, where VDOT identifies a variety of potential trail projects and makes recommendations to the board that they kind of either accept or modify. And so I think that's also where you all as advocates have an opportunity to engage with the board and to try and like see what they're thinking or what they might be talking about with the department, to try and get some insight into like what that process can be, or potentially to influence that process as well.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the question, Brantley. We are going to move on to the next section. If you have questions, again, we'll take them in the chat box and see where we can answer those either as part of the meeting or in a follow-up email.
I'd like to welcome Wayne Clark, formerly with Cisco Systems, who is going to share with us information about the economic impact of trails and Cisco in Raleigh Triangle. And I'm just going to show a map while he talks that shows you where Raleigh is in relation to Washington and Richmond. And this map is a new interactive map that shows you access to jobs by bicycle. And it was done for the Appalachian Regional Commission, but it shows you pretty well statewide. So welcome, Wayne.
Thank you. And do a mic check. How's this sound?
I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Yeah, I ended up here because I spent a lot of miles in the saddle with Champ Burnley. You know, he likes to talk. So we both love bicycling and have a fairly deep background in high tech. And you know, one of the stories, we tell each other stories, and I told him about the story about how Cisco ended up with its East Coast headquarters in the Research Triangle Park. It's not the Raleigh Triangle, by the way, Jennifer. The Research Triangle is actually the triangle formed by the three universities in the area, Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, and NC State. And the Research Triangle Park was created in the 1950s because the state determined that all of the people who were graduating, all the locals who were going to those universities were graduating and leaving the state. So they created this research park and provided incentives for people to stay in the state of North Carolina. So this was in the 1950s. And then what I really want to talk about is how bicycling played a role in the decision for Cisco to establish its East Coast headquarters in RTP. This is 30 years ago that we did this. This was in the early 1990s, so it was 30 years prior to Amazon HQ2. We didn't run it as a fashion show like Amazon did, but there were some similarities, and I want to talk about that mostly at the end in terms of bicycling. Right now I'm on the East Coast Greenway Alliance. I was on their advisory board. Now I'm on the Maryland State Committee. I'm on the September 11th National Memorial Trail with Dave Brickley and others. And I'm also on the Washington, D.C. area Capital Trails Coalition. I think I saw Kevin O'Brien, who was one of the participants on this call as well. How bicycling played a role in the site selection for Cisco there. As in 1981, I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and I brought some friends down to ride across the entire state. So we rode from Asheville in the mountains to Manteo on the coast, and on the Mountains to Sea Trail. And it's not really a trail in the sense that you're talking about trails, which are generally off-road. This was an on-road route that was created by the Bike and Ped division of NCDOT. And that's one of the highlights I'd like to bring out, because there's only 2 states in the U.S. who actually have a Bike Ped division in their statewide Department of Transportation. And that provides an incredible amount of value, and it has to North Carolina. That's why it's ended up being one of the most bicycle-friendly states in the Southeast. But so fast forward 10 years, I moved out of Columbus, Ohio. I was living in Silicon Valley, and I became an early member of the founding team of Cisco back in 1990. A little bit of sort of history of the internet. Cisco was actually the primary equipment vendor for what became the commodity internet in the era of Netscape in the 1990s. But before that, it was a military network. It was ARPANET. And then thanks to Senator Gore, it was pulled out of the military and given to universities and became NSFNet. And then that evolved into the commodity internet that we all know today. But there was a point where corporations could not really play on the internet. It was only for universities. So I was brought into Cisco to basically adapt the internet to enterprise networking protocols, predominantly IBM protocols. And as a result of that, we actually, Cisco found out we hit a gold mine, and it became actually 85% of our revenue, corporate revenue, throughout most of the 1990s. While Cisco was known for, for its role in the internet, we were making our money selling to corporations. And we decided that, because of the growth of the company, we needed to have an East Coast presence. So there was a committee put together to look at appropriate sites for Cisco's East Coast headquarters. And they going from the north to the south. The northernmost one was Boston. Then we looked at White Plains, north of New York City, Morristown, New Jersey, Washington, D.C. We actually looked at D.C. for a while. Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, and then Atlanta. And we narrowed it down pretty quickly to North Carolina for a couple of reasons. One is I was the founder of the enterprise networking business at the company, and I loved the bicycling because of that 1981 experience riding across the state. And I thought there was an opportunity there for Cisco to play a major role in using bicycling as a recruiting for employees. And that actually turned out to work out pretty well. We so over the course of the year, Cisco ended up going from, so I was its first employee in North Carolina. We ended up with almost 8,000 people there, and at its peak, and it went from 2 offices to 12 buildings, and we actually didn't need all the land that we got from the state of North Carolina to build on, so we actually were able to sell part of that to companies like Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse and Network Appliances. And one of the most recent ones I think you may have heard about is Apple Computer has now decided to have an East Coast headquarters, and Cisco sold them the excess land to create their East Coast headquarters. I was in North Carolina. I spent a lot of time in North Carolina still, but I was down there in late August, and I asked some of the people, could you give me a rough estimate of the economic impact of Cisco's decision 30 years ago to move here? And she said, I don't know, but it's in the tens of billions of dollars to the state, because it actually became a magnet for other companies to move to the area after Cisco had chosen it. There was quite a number of companies out of Silicon Valley that decided, we'd like to be there too, and opened up, remote offices. And so I don't have a real number, but the cascade effect over a 30-year period is in the tens of billions of dollars. Now, put that against HQ2. I don't know if any of you have actually looked at the RFP that Amazon put out for its site selection. They ended up at the end with 25 sites they were looking at, and that's when the RFP was published. So on the selection site, on that list of 25, was not only Columbus, Ohio, but also Research Triangle Park and Washington, D.C. area. So I was running sort of an email banter with my friends from those regions because they thought they were going to get it. And I go, well, have you actually read the RFP? Amazon's asking for bicycling facilities in the RFP. So bicycling actually did play a role in Amazon's decision to move to Northern Virginia. So if you happen to have access to that RFP, it's item number 7 on page 7 of the RFP. It clearly spells out the need for bicycling facilities in its transportation section. So that's all I've got, Jennifer. Yeah, any questions for anybody?
I don't see any questions in the chat box. If any of you have a quick question, Jennifer, I don't know how much time we have in terms of for the next part of the presentation.
I think we can move ahead. I really appreciate you coming on, Wayne, and sharing that information with our group here today.
Thank you.
I think a lot of us know empirically that these things are important, but it really helps hearing it from you. Now I'd like to invite Andy Clark on to talk with us about alternatives to bollards.
Thanks, Jennifer. Is my sound working okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
All right. So Wayne Clark, Andy Clark, no relation. There's an E on the end of my name just to distinguish us. I want to acknowledge that this is a slightly prosaic topic compared to creating new units of the national park, headquartering major companies, $100 million trail budgets. But you all know that as soon as people start talking about bollards, the conversation flies. Like people somehow want to talk about bollards. If you are on Twitter, I would absolutely encourage you to go to and follow the World Bollard Association. It's one of the best sites on Twitter, and of course, all of my information is due to their fine work. So my name is Andy Clark. I work for Tool Design. We're a planning, design, and engineering firm. We are actually part of the Cambridge Systematics team that Nick referenced, but that's not what I'm talking about today. It is exclusively bollards. And when we talk about this topic, at least where my background is, it's primarily paved or hard surface trails, shared use paths, side paths. But I think some of the principles and some of the thought processes apply to any kind of trail, but most of the images you're going to see are unapologetically paved and hard surface trails and shared use paths and side paths. So alternatives to bollards, next slide. The simple answer and alternative is to not have a bollard, is no bollards. The default increasingly in design manuals, guidebooks on trails like the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, the Custis Trail in Arlington, WNOD Trail in Northern Virginia, is to just not have bollards at all. And I could stop the presentation there, but that would be no fun at all because I want to show you some more examples of what to do and not to do and how to avoid using bollards. So next slide. One of the slides is missing, but that's okay. You can, let me introduce you to a bollard in Hilton Head Island, which is like one has to wonder what it's doing there. If you're following the kid in red, you're not even going to know there's a bollard there until right at the last minute. Presumably his father ahead in the with the trailer has to navigate a pretty close gap. There are access issues, there are safety issues, there are experiential issues related to putting bollards on trails that I think are worth paying attention to. Next slide. And while you can see, hopefully from this, go back one. Yeah, there we go. You can see that this bollard has had its share of scrapes. Which is kind of funny and seems kind of trivial until someone hits that at high speed or hits a bollard at high speed or in the dark or doesn't see it or falls awkwardly or is a child or an older person. And not to get too horrible about it, but there are serious injuries and fatal injury, even crashes that occur because of bollards. So it's not a trivial issue, and we should be thinking about why we're putting these things here in the first place, and if there are indeed alternatives. So next slide. What are some of the alternatives? Not these kinds of alternatives. These create exactly the same kinds of access issues, visibility issues, and safety issues that we want to avoid. One has to really question why these bollards are here. Next slide. Do you really need a bollard? There seems to be three reasons to put bollards in place. Number one, there's the vandal. There's the person who wants to just drive onto a trail and cause mayhem, set fire to their vehicle, burn down houses, do whatever they're going to do. But it's the vandal who you want to stop getting onto the trail with a vehicle. There's the lost soul. There's the person who's following GPS, takes a right turn when they're not expecting to, and ends up on a trail. Completely accidental, but you know it happens. And then there's occasionally the legitimate user, like a maintenance vehicle or an access equipment that needs to get onto the trail, emergency access. The two pictures here, like the one on the left, you can't actually drive onto the trail unless you really, really want to, and you're going to do it anyway, whether there's a bollard there or not. It's in Asheville, North Carolina. The one on the right is on the Cannon Creek Greenway in Richmond, and there's only one person who uses this driveway to get to and from their house, and yet there are bollards to stop them getting onto the trail. one hopes they would remember that the trail is there and really wouldn't need the bollard to prevent them getting onto the trail. So do you really need to have those bollards there? Think about who you're trying to prevent getting on there, and what's actually necessary. Because when you put these bollards here, they're here 365 days a year, but they are only dealing with and addressing a very occasional issue or problem. So definitely a trade-off to consider. Next slide. If you decide you do really need a bollard, then try not to hide them. Make them as visible and obvious as possible, and try not to make them an obstacle course so that people are veering in and out of the bollards to try and get the clearest path, or cut corners to avoid the bollard, which puts them on the other side or wrong side of the trail. Next slide. Similarly, you want to make sure that if your bollards are removable, that the whole bollard is removed, that there aren't bits left in the ground that create an additional hazard. So the choice of bollard, if you're going to do it, is critically important. Next slide. Put them in the right place. These are not in the right place. You know from your own experience that if you put 2 bollards on each side, in the middle of each side of a trail, people going both directions are going to head straight for the gap in the middle and cause a potential conflict. So again, if you're going to put the bollards on your trail, there has to be a good reason for it. Put them in the right place. Next slide. What is the right place? What is the right sequencing? Next slide. Not the one on the left, maybe the one on the right, but question why you have a bollard and gateway features that just narrows the gap down and makes people nervous and uncomfortable. The appropriate way to put a series of 3 bollards on the trail, if you really have to do it, 1 in the middle, 2 just off to either side of the trail, so that there's a clear path and people go on the appropriate side of the trail to their destination. Next slide. There are occasions when you do want to clearly identify that there is a trail, and you can do that at an intersection of a side path or a major road or trail intersection. And in those instances, then the type of bollard, the location of the bollard, the design around the bollard should make the trail user really clear that there's an obstacle there. Show them a path around it, give them enough room to operate either side of the device, and in some cases even just be able to ride over the top of it in the event that you need to. But it clearly conveys you're not supposed to drive on there. It doesn't create too much of a hazard for the normal trail user. Next slide. Last but not least, this seems to me like a really good alternative to a bollard, where you need to identify that there is a trail there. You don't want people driving on it, that it's a non-motorized facility. In the event of an emergency or for a maintenance vehicle, you can still drive over the top of this. But for the lost soul, it stops you getting on the trail by mistake. It reminds the maintenance or emergency people that this is a trail, not a road. And honestly, you're not going to do anything to stop the vandal if they really want to get on the trail. So this is the simplest and best alternative to a bollard if you need to distinguish a trail. But the best alternative and your default, in my view, should be no bollard at all. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Andy. And I think we have maybe, we're really out of time for questions, but if you will put your question in the chat, we'll follow up. Thanks so much, Andy. Really appreciate you sharing that information with us. Next, we have Kat Anthony, who's going to provide an update on the Virginia Trails Alliance.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate all your hard work putting on this meeting. So yes, my name is Kat Anthony. I'm the president of the Virginia Trails Alliance, and then also work for the Capitol Trail Foundation. It is a really exciting meeting to have VDOT talk about the Office of Trails, 89 million plus 14 million of TA money. there's a lot going on, and I want to say partly the Virginia Trails Alliance helped with many partners to help get some of this stuff done. And so the Virginia Trails Alliance is a number of organizations who've come together to advocate for more trails or for trails. We have been focused on the Office of Trails and funding of trails in the past. And so I'll put my email address in the chat if you want to get on our kind of email updates and also our listserv as well. We just had a meeting about a couple weeks ago to talk about kind of the next couple months. Our goal is to create a letter. Right now it's in draft form of priorities for the VTA. It's really great to hear Nick echo, increasing funding for dedicated funding for trails. I also want to, potentially advocate for recreational trails as well. I hear from many people that recreational trails has been kind of left off the multi-use trails. And so I think that would be a priority for us. And then hopefully assisting with the Office of Trails, the formation of that. I think those are going to be our three big priorities as we enter into the General Assembly. Our letter will be used, sent to the governor's office and to legislators to know that there is a need for trails, and there's more to be done. And so I was happy to see again Nick from talking about the CTB board meetings. They do have a public comment section at every board meeting, and that's a great way to educate the CTB board about what you're doing, and the need for trails. And so our goal is to get ready for the General Assembly session. We'll have a letter more public in the coming weeks. But if you'd like to get involved, I'll put my email in the chat and we can go from there. And happy to answer any questions. Hearing none, that means I've done a good presentation, which makes me happy. So perfect.
This is Crystal McKelvey, and I believe I'm next on the agenda, so I can do a brief introduction if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Kat, for that. And thank you, everybody. This is always such a fascinating meeting. So I'm Crystal McKelvey. I'm the DCR Planning and Recreation Resources Chief Recreation Grant Manager. And as such, and some other myriad responsibilities. But today I want to update you about the outcomes from some of our 2022 grant rounds. And if I could share the screen, or if somebody could advance my slide.
I'm working on it right now. Where are we at?
That's fine. Or I can screen share if you organize that. But one thing that's always of particular interest to this group, of course, is the Recreational Trails Program. And our 2022 grant round results, just a second, I'll pull up mine. Well, as to open that and to kind of get to what's the need for recreational trails, I think it's pretty telling that if you go to the third slide, please. So in summary, we received 21 applications that were eligible projects for this most recent grant round, and it was worth a request amount of $5.7 million federal dollars, because this is an 80-20 match reimbursement program, and the total project cost of those 21 projects was $10.9 million. And currently in Virginia, we do only receive $1.45 million for the federal apportionment. Back to the RTP, thank you. And so these now on the screen are the projects that were authorized in this grant round. So we were able to allocate all of the funding for sure. And just wanted to show that we have put out a press release. We are in the sub-agreement phase. These have been federally authorized. They're pretty well spread out throughout the Commonwealth, and we have everything from a foundation, town, county, state park, national partners, and another nonprofit. So we're excited to work with them on these projects, you know, coming through preliminary engineering onto construction. And then the next grant round for RTP is pending that authorization amount of appropriation, or apportionment, excuse me, all the different grant lingo. But we do foresee getting $1.45 million, but we always wait to get that notice from the federal government before we open a grant round. So, and they do always have to be authorized before September. So if you're thinking about that program, of course, we have a lot of information on our website, and you can reach out to us with any questions. The other large program that we manage is the LWCF program, if you could advance. So this is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, specifically the state and local formula program. Our most recent apportionment for federal fiscal year 22 was $6.4 million. And so we do foresee that's a large result of the Great American Outdoors Act, that this program is receiving more funding than we had in prior years. And this was our first time in the 22 grant round for many years to release a acquisition and development grant round. As a result from that, we did receive 18 different project requests. This was worth $11.4 million requested amount of federal dollars, with a total project cost of those 18 being $25.7 million. Again, this is showing a high need of funding for different recreation projects in the state, but with the process that the National Park Service has, 6 projects made it through to authorization after evaluation of how complete the NEPA compliance, Section 106, the design, engineering, and permitting phases were. So for this program, you basically need to have a project that's right before construction ready. The engineering and review needs to be completed. But we do assist people. So there's other 12 projects that did not get authorized by the National Park Service. We're going to continue to work with them in hopes that they can be ready for the next NPS open window. This program is 50-50 match reimbursement from the National Park Service. And this shows the ones that were authorized. Again, a pretty good spread throughout the Commonwealth, varying amounts, one acquisition, but largely development. And most of the applications were for development. So future grant round dates to be determined. And we do hope to have it open for development, combination, and acquisition projects moving forward. Then we do have an opportunity open right now for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. So this is under the LWCF umbrella, but this is a national competition. This program is also receiving higher funding than in just recent years, $192 million nationally. And so Virginia can participate in the pre-application process. And so we have put that out. There's a lot of criteria about this that varies. Specific projects are being solicited. So it greater than, let's see, sorry, just had a pause. Greater than 30,000 population, incorporated cities and towns, because this is focused on urban underserved priorities. There are many different things that the National Park Service are looking for. So I would ask you to go to our website, look at that pre-application form. It's due November 15th to us, and that's just a pre-application. And then we in DCRPRR will follow up with those applicants and determine more about how ready their project is to be submitted to the National Park Service. But the NPS, do the final selections. And we're working on a pretty tight federal timeline here. So again, it's focused on pretty much construction-ready projects that are also in a position where they can wait for a little while for the authorization process. So please do reach out to me if you have questions about that program, but look at the beginning initial eligibility to determine if you're in an area that works. There is some language in here about walkability. So they need to be parks that can be walked to by a nearby community. And so there's some connection to trails that we all might want to think about for future recreation planning, because the ORLP program will be continuing. It's receiving a lot of federal attention and could actually be codified in the future. There are people working on that, to my understanding. So then a couple other opportunities I wanted to discuss. Next slide. Is we do participate in the Governor's Environmental Excellence Awards, especially with the focus that one category is on the implementation of the Virginia Outdoors Plan. This award program is administered by the Department of Environmental Quality. So please go directly to their website for the applications that are due December 8th. But this is for awards acknowledging successful and innovative programs and projects throughout the Commonwealth. So we do want to hear about what you're proud of, what's been accomplished, and consider your excellent work for this program. More specifics on the DEQ website. And then lastly, I think that's my last slide, but I just wanted to provide an update about the Virginia Outdoors Plan 2023 and recognize my staff. Allison Tillett is online, and she has joined our team as of July. And she is the coordinator for the Virginia Outdoors Plan 2023. And we're excited to have her. We're working on all the information that we've compiled over the years. And we are projecting for this publication, as it's the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, we need to have it published next year. And we're coming up with some really creative ways and innovative ways to present that, both virtually and in print. So we are in that phase of putting our head down with our contributing authors and writing, getting the survey results from VCU come this winter. So anybody that participated in that Virginia Outdoor Survey, thank you. And we'll have results later. And then I also want to recognize Kelly Seaton. She is our Recreation Grants Coordinator, and she's online taking minutes. And she largely administers the RTP program, and also largely monitors our box that our email address that I'd like you all to use is recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov. If you have any questions, I know that's a lot in short time, but thank you so much, Jennifer, for letting me update everybody.
Thank you, Crystal. Just wanted to mention briefly, we've talked about a lot of funding that's coming through the state, and of course we're all grateful for that, but there's also a lot of federal money out there, and the Federal Highway Administration has updated their bike ped funding opportunities matrix, which is available online at this link in blue, and you can go through all the different grant programs, which are across the top in blue, and you can go follow those and read more about them. And then you can look down the activity or project type to the left, and you can really find what programs will fund what specific projects, bike ped projects. So it's a very helpful matrix that's out there and recently updated. Also, just wanted to echo what Matt mentioned earlier, that we have a new hotel opening up at Foster Falls along the New River Trail. And this is just kind of a before and after shot of that hotel. Beautiful building. And the groundbreaking on the High Bridge Trail Center. We also have, DCR has helped with the Mendota Trail, provided some funding for the Mendota Trail. And they're just over 6 years into the project, and the end is in sight with just a little more than a mile left to complete in the 12.5-mile trail from Bristol to Mendota, and that's part of the Beaches to Bluegrass Trail. Also, in the town of Damascus, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and the town have worked together to provide a new trail center, which opened up in the fall, and it's a hub that unites visitors and volunteers with a wide range of outdoor recreation resources throughout the region. Thanks to Roanoke County and RideSource, there's a new McAfee Knob Trailhead shuttle service that provides safe and convenient transportation to the trailhead on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And I also wanted to mention that the regional governments are really working hard, some of them on regional trail connections Northern Virginia recently had a regional recreational trails summit. And, they really looked at, closing the gaps and lots of other things, which I know they're going to have the notes from that meeting available on their website. And the Hampton Roads has issued a regional trails report. Just saw that news yesterday. And then the Glow Line along the Elizabeth River Trail is going to be opening on October 29th. So I know we're all excited to see that phosphorescent trail that glows at night. And if you have other updates, I wish we had more time to go over other updates that are happening in your locality. Please put them in the chat and we can share those with the notes. I just wanted to share a couple of other resources that are out there. VDOT has a local assistance division that offers workshops, and this link is to one of their recent workshops where you can look at the presentations, and if you're going to be applying for money through VDOT, that might be very helpful to you. They also have the Office of Intermobility Planning and Investment has an Interact VTrans Map Explorer, and we're hoping to add a regional trails map to that Explorer that would showcase all the trails that meet the definition that was in the multi-use trails report for regional trails. Prioritizing active transportation, health, and safety in Virginia paths is a collaboration between VDOT and the Virginia Department of Health. So please go to that website and learn more about that. And they also have a Virginia Walkability Action Institute, which they're taking applications now, but tomorrow's the last day. So if you were interested in being part of that cohort, please go check that out. And VDOT has issued a new guidance on pedestrian crossing accommodations at unsignalized approaches. So, please check that out if that's something that you're into. In response to my email regarding stack priorities, some of you would like to see more attention paid to completing long distance priority trails in Virginia, like the East Coast Greenway, while others want to emphasize or include more natural surface, sustainable multi-use public trails, especially trails in parks. So that's probably going to be, we're going to talk about that more at our next meeting, which will be at the Virginia Land Conservation and Greenways Conference in Harrisonburg. Also, some other topics that came up from people who replied to that email. DCR should work on building a relationship with the Office of Trails and figure out what mechanisms will be in place so that STAC can be a resource for the formation and structure of that office. Many of you would like to see a needs assessment that puts a price on the maintenance backlog, as well as what it's going to cost to build the trails that are proposed that are out there. And as well as there's still a need for a comprehensive map of current and proposed trails. There's some ArcGIS Online does offer some promising new methods for a collaborative approach to that. And someone also asked us to take a fresh look at the Trails program, especially the strategic plan from an accessibility and equal opportunity lens. And so these can all be potential topics for the next meeting. But if you have other ideas, please email me. And there's a link here where you can subscribe to the Greenways and Trails e-newsletter that comes out quarterly if you are not already receiving that. Next steps, I mentioned the Virginia Walkability applications that are due, and Crystal mentioned the grants that are due November 15th. We are going to have a virtual agritourism conference December 6th to 7th. So look for more information about that, and an in-person conference in Blacksburg later in March. And of course, the Land Conservation and Greenways Conference, where the next STAC meeting will be held on April 26th. I think I put April 25th here, so excuse that error. And that's all I have. I think we are a little bit ahead of time. So if anybody has any questions, we can respond to those if you have them now. And Samantha, do you see anything you want to ask? All right. Well, we probably have some questions for other speakers who are no longer on the line, and we will get those responses out to you. I appreciate everybody giving your time today, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good to see you. Good to see everyone.
Thanks, Jennifer.